Lesbian Love in Prison, Part 8, Lesbian Romance. The fluorescent light above cell block D had been flickering for 11 days, and nobody had come to fix it. That was the thing about Maplewood Correctional Facility. The small things broke slowly, and nobody noticed until the darkness became impossible to ignore. Serena noticed. She noticed everything now, because noticing was the only freedom left to her inside these gray, suffocating walls. She noticed the way the light pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Every evening around 7, right when the guards changed shifts, right when the noise of the block softened just enough for her to hear her own thoughts. And in those fragile, flickering moments, she thought of Daniela. It had been 31 days since they had taken Daniela to the solitary wing. 31 days since the morning Serena had woken up and reached instinctively across the narrow space between their bunks, only to find cold air where warmth used to live. The reason had been something small and cruel the way reasons always were in places like this. Daniela had spoken back to Officer Hatch during count, her voice carrying just a little too much dignity for a woman the system had decided deserved none. And for that single moment of quiet defiance, she had been stripped away from Serena like a page torn out of the middle of a book, leaving the story senseless and incomplete. Serena was 34 years old, and she had spent the last 3 years inside Maplewood on a conviction that her overworked public defender had assured her would be overturned on appeal. The appeal had gone nowhere. She had come into this place with hard eyes and a harder heart, certain that she would survive it the way she had survived everything else in her life. Being alone, self-contained, needing nothing and no one. She had grown up learning that love was a liability. Her mother had taught her that lesson early and often, and the world outside had reinforced it with every relationship that had crumbled under the weight of Serena's inability to stay open, to stay soft, to stay. She had built herself into something impenetrable, and she had been proud of it. Then Daniela had arrived 14 months ago, with a battered copy of a Pablo Neruda collection tucked into her single allowed personal item, and she had sat down across from Serena in the common room as if she had been doing it her entire life, as if Serena's cold silence was simply a different kind of language she already knew how to speak. Daniela was 41, with dark eyes that held entire lifetimes of complicated feeling, and she did not try to fix Serena or decode her or win her over. She simply existed alongside her, sharing passages from her Neruda book without asking for anything in return, pointing out when the evening light came through the high, narrow windows at an angle that turned the concrete walls briefly, painfully beautiful. It was the small things that had undone Serena completely, not grand gestures. There was no room for grand gestures in a place where every movement was monitored and every emotion was a potential liability. It was the way Daniela had quietly traded her dessert portion for weeks to get Serena an extra hour of library access. When she learned Serena was working on her Charity, it was the way she had stood slightly in front of Serena during a particularly vicious confrontation with a group of women in their block, not aggressively, not drawing attention, but simply placing her body between Serena and the danger the way a mountain absorbs weather. It was the way she said Serena's name, not as a label but as a whole sentence, as if the name itself contained something worth protecting. By the time Serena understood what was happening inside her own chest, it was already too late to reverse it. She was in love with Daniela in the most inconvenient, most impossible, most consuming way she had ever experienced anything. She was in love in a place where love was not permitted, not safe, not practical. She was in love behind walls and under cameras and inside a life that was not supposed to have room for anything this tender or this real. And she had told Daniela so one evening in the library corner, her voice low and frightened and more honest than she had been with any human being in her entire adult life. And Daniela had looked at her with those dark, complicated eyes and said nothing for a long moment, and then had reached across the table and pressed her fingers briefly, deliberately over Serena's hand. And that small touch had rearranged everything. Now Daniela was gone into the solitary wing, and Serena was learning all over again what it meant to survive something she had not chosen. The days had a particular cruelty to them when you were waiting for someone to come back. Serena moved through the routines of Maplewood on autopilot. Count, meals, work assignments. Count again when she felt herself beginning to close back up the way a wound closes. Not healed, but simply sealed over. Scar tissue forming where something living used to be. She recognized the process because she had done it so many times before. She knew how to disappear inside herself. She had always been extraordinarily good at that particular kind of vanishing. What she had not expected was Gabrielle. Gabrielle was the facility's new volunteer counselor, a woman in her late 40s, who came every Tuesday and Thursday and sat with inmates in a small room near the administration wing that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Serena had avoided her for 6 weeks out of pure instinct. But on the 31st day of Daniela's absence, something in Serena's carefully maintained composure developed a crack too, significant to manage, and she found herself sitting across from Gabrielle, without quite knowing how she had gotten there. She did not intend to say anything real. She planned to perform the way she always performed in situations that required vulnerability, on giving enough to satisfy the requirement while protecting everything that actually mattered. But Gabrielle had a quality that Serena could not immediately defend against. She did not push. She did not prompt. She simply sat in the comfortable silence with the ease of someone who understood that silence was not emptiness, but a form of waiting. And eventually Serena heard herself talking. She talked about Daniela. She talked about what it had meant to discover, at 34 years old and inside a federal correctional facility, that she was capable of loving another person with her whole self, rather than the carefully rationed portions she had always offered before. She talked about the fear, not the fear of being seen or judged, but the deeper, more ancient fear that this was simply one more thing the world would take from her before she had fully understood what it was. Gabrielle listened to all of it, and when Serena finally went quiet, she said something that Serena would carry with her for the rest of her time in that place. She said that love found in difficult circumstances was not lesser love. It was tested love, the kind that had already survived conditions that would have destroyed something fragile. She said that what Serena was feeling was not weakness. It was the bravest thing a person who had spent a lifetime building walls could possibly do. Serena walked back to cell block D, that evening feeling hollowed out in the way that is actually the beginning of being filled. On the 39th day, they brought Daniela back. Serena was at the sink in the block bathroom when she heard the door, and she turned and saw Daniela standing in the entrance to the block, looking thinner and quieter and carrying something careful behind her eyes that had not been there before. The distance between them was maybe 20 feet, and it took Serena 4 seconds to cross it. And then she stopped because she remembered the cameras, and she remembered the rules, and she remembered every reason why she was supposed to be careful. And then she looked at Daniela's face, and she stopped remembering any of it. And she crossed the remaining distance and stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating off Daniela's skin. And she said her name in that same way Daniela had always said hers, not as a label but as a whole sentence, as if the name itself contained something worth protecting. Daniela looked at her with those dark eyes, and something in them broke open gently, like a door finally swinging wide after years of being stuck, and she said very quietly that she was all right. She said she had been okay because she had thought of Serena every single day, and that had been enough to keep her from disappearing entirely into the gray, endless sameness of that isolation cell. She said that she had made a decision in there, in the silence and the solitude, that when she came back she was going to stop being so careful about the right things, and more careful about the important ones. They were not free. They were still inside Maplewood, still subject to every humiliation and restriction and small cruelty that the facility imposed on the lives of the women within it. Their story was not finished, and it was not simple, and it was not safe. Serena knew that. She had never been the kind of person who confused hope with naivety. But standing in cell block D, with the flickering fluorescent light pulsing its tired rhythm above them, she understood something she had been circling for months, without being able to name it. Love was not something that required the right conditions to be real. It did not need freedom to exist, or space, or perfect circumstances. It needed only two people willing to choose it over and over again inside whatever life they had been given However imperfect and complicated and confined that life might be, she was still choosing it. She intended to keep choosing it. If you believe in kindness, if you believe that love can grow even in the hardest and most unlikely places, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means more than you know. It tells us that stories like this one, stories about real human hearts finding each other in impossible circumstances, are worth telling. Every like, every subscription is a small act of faith in the idea that love deserves to be witnessed, no matter where it blooms. Before this story ends, we have one small request for you. Drop a comment below and tell us, do you believe that love can truly survive anything? We read every single comment, and your words are what keep this community alive and full of heart. Serena lay on her bunk that night listening to the familiar sounds of Maplewood. Settling around her, the distant clang of doors, the murmur of voices, the flicker and hum of that persistent broken light. And for the first time in 39 days, she was not simply enduring the night. She was inside it fully, feeling it completely, present in her own life in the way that only becomes possible when you have finally stopped running from the thing you need most. Daniela was in the bunk beside hers, close enough that Serena could hear the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing in the dark. And that sound, not that ordinary, irreplaceable, quietly miraculous sound, was the most beautiful thing Serena had heard in years.